Good evening. Hello, welcome. This evening, we are pleased to welcome our opening musical guest, singer-songwriter Annie Fitzgerald. Annie is a professional musician and classically trained vocalist of more than 20 years. She studied music in college and received her degree in vocal performance from the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. She went on to work professionally in musical theater at the Ordway Center and as a company member at Chanhassen Dinner Theaters for several years before moving to New York City to pursue her music. Upon her return to Minnesota, The Current named Annie a Minnesota musician rising to the top, and her single, Anam Cara, was on the ballot for The Current's top 89 songs of 2023. Annie's work is deeply influenced by the mystical expression of life and guided by a desire for self-expression, self-love, and wholeness. She's a proud member of the Minnesota music community, and you can find her playing her original music in and around the Minneapolis area. Please join me in welcoming Annie Fitzgerald.
Thank you so much for such a lovely introduction. I'm so grateful to be here with all of you. It's probably one of the coolest spaces that I've gotten to play my songs, so I'm grateful to be here. I am a Minnesota girl. I was born and raised in Crookston, Minnesota, and spent a bunch of time here going to school and working, and then I moved out to New York City and loved my time there, but I also really missed home and really missed being around family, and so I dreamt a lot about how I was gonna figure out how to get back here someday. And this is a song actually that I wrote on a train to Connecticut, wishing that I was on my way home to Minnesota. It's called Watch the World Go By.
City's so cold, or maybe that's just my insides. The dreamer in me is seeing your face in the trees, right by the little farmhouse just off the tracks where you and I are just sitting back. I hear you say, let's throw our cares away and watch the world go by. Let's watch the world go by. Just you and me and the gentle breeze watching the world go by. I close my eyes and sit back and romanticize what life would be like if we sealed our great divide. So I'm reaching for you across the sea of despair. The hands on the clock are not gonna stop until we mend the stair. I hear you say, let's throw our cares away and watch the world go by. Let's watch the world go by. Just you and me and the gentle breeze watching the world Let's watch the world go by. Let's watch the world go by. Just you and me and the gentle breeze, watching the world go by. Soon it will be just us three, you and me and the gentle breeze.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This next song I wrote, which I feel like is especially potentially relevant right now, just about the importance of holding space for one another, even as we're going through difficult times, and really not being afraid to step into difficult conversations. It's called "I Won't Walk Away."
High inside, shining a bright light on a street fight between what's wrong and right. And I'll breathe in the mess we made, and I'll breathe out the heavy weight, but I won't walk away. I won't walk away. I won't walk away from you. Growing into my own skin, and I'm taller than I've ever been. So I'll breathe in the mess we've made, and I'll breathe out the big charade, but I won't walk away. I won't walk away. I won't walk away from you. Let the light in. Let the light in. I won't walk away. I won't walk away. I won't walk away from you. I won't walk away. I won't walk away. I won't walk away from you.
Thank you so much. This next song is one of one of the more recent ones that I released as a single, and it was one of my COVID songs that I wrote during all of that uncertainty and craziness, and it's just really about, I guess, once again, holding space for people that you love and moving through things with patience together in presence. It's called "I'll Wait Here."
Instead of words that I would say to you, holding presents in my hands, and all the gray haze we're floating through wasn't our plan. All the wrongs, the rights, the hindsight, reflecting in the air, well, it will come clear as daylight in time. Ooh, I'll sit with you as the rain's coming down, and I'll wait. I'll wait here. There will be things that I will likely miss as I try and keep you dry and warm and leaning into braveness as I tend to the fire. If you take your time and occupy all that space inside your chest, it will come clear as daylight in time. Ooh, I'll sit with you as the rain's coming down, and I'll wait. I'll wait. Ooh. Ooh, I'll sit with you as the rain's coming down. I'll wait. I'll wait. I'll wait here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This next song that I'm going to share with you was a project that I had the pleasure of being a part of. It was also kind of a COVID project. It started before all the things in January of 2020. And then this compilation album came out, and it was called Me Too Minneapolis. There was, I think, 17 or 18 women, femmes, non-binary folks that contributed a song to this compilation to raise awareness about domestic violence. And it was just really an incredibly inspiring group of humans that I got to be a part of. And we raised some money for Planned Parenthood, which was also wonderful. And this was the song I wrote for it. It's called I Know That Sound.
Pounding in your chest, invisible bulletproof vest, and all the worries in your heart that may be mistakes you've started making, outweigh having something to say. You think your words get in the way. Ooh, but I know that sound. It's eggshells cracking. Ooh, I know that sound. It's eggshells cracking. When the dust settles in, and minutes after they walk in, inside your alarm bells go off, and all you can do is talk about the old days to muffle your heart breaking. You can try and explain away. Ooh, but I know that sound. It's eggshells cracking. Ooh, I know that sound. It's eggshells cracking. Ooh, I know that sound. It's eggshells cracking. I know that sound. Oh, that sound. Ooh, I know that sound. It's eggshells cracking. Ooh, I know that sound.
Thank you. I just got a couple more for you. I'm really, once again, thank you so much to the Town Hall Forum for having me again. This is the second time I've been able to be with you all, and it's just really lovely. Thank you, Keith, for doing sound, too. This next song is an old one. I wrote it, it was on my first full-length record that I put out in 2010. And it's about those people that we have in our lives that we love and that we want to, anytime they're going through something hard or scary or what have you, that you kind of want to scoop them up and make everything better for them, which I've learned through some years of therapy that that's not always the best decision. But it's still, I think, a tendency of mine anyways. This is called Hero.
I want to be your shelter, fence out your fears. And if I could, I'd mend what went wrong, and all your worries would be gone. All your worries would be gone. And I can't put a shield around your heart when you're wishing you were anywhere but where you are. And if I could, I would surround you, pick you up and fly you away, pick you up and carry you away. And we all know I'm not a hero, but my intentions are true. And at the end of a long day, you'll find my power in my love for you. I'd catch your tears as they're falling. When you need a hand, I'd be around. And if I could, I'd travel to your hard times and stop the clock and make them mine. Stop the clock and make them mine. We all know I'm not a hero, but my intentions are true. And at the end of a long day, you'll find my power in my love for you. I'm offering all that I have. It may not seem like much, but I know that our love is more than enough for us. We all know I'm not a hero, but my intentions are true. And at the end of a long day, you'll find my power in my love. And we all know I'm not a hero, but my intentions are true. And at the end of a long day, you'll find my power in my love for you. You'll find my power in my love for you.
Thank you so much. This last song that I'll play for you is, I think it's my most recent single that I released It's about missed connections. And truthfully, it's about one of my dearest friends in college who I really liked, and apparently he liked me too, but neither of us would say anything. And then we went off and had our lives and all of the things, and we reconnected, and we finally said something, and we're gonna get married. So that's sort of what inspired this song. It's called What About Now?
Driving through this famous town, these streets I never thought I'd be back around, seeing that old park swing where we sat and never said how we were feeling. Ooh, what about now? Ooh, still feel the same somehow. If I try to find you, ooh, what about now? River passed by as I wondered why both you and I let us come down to goodbye. But I feel like I've just come home, and I'd really like to know. Yeah, I'd really like to know. What about now? Ooh, I still feel the same somehow. If I try to find you, ooh, what about now? White lights, I keep trying to stay between. As I daydream, the edge of town is drawing near. I don't want to wait for a sign like I did for all those years. What about now? I still feel the same. If I turned around, what about now? Ooh, what about now? Ooh, I still feel the same somehow. If I try to find you, ooh, what about now? Ooh, what about now? Ooh, what about now?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me and for listening. I'm grateful. I'm Annie Fitzgerald. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you again, Annie Fitzgerald. Thank you. Good evening. I'm Reverend Dr. Megan Gage Finn, and I serve Westminster as Senior Associate Pastor. And let me again welcome you to Westminster this evening, the home of the Westminster Town Hall Forum since 1980. We are grateful you're here. Please take time after the program to enjoy our spaces. I hope you'll tour the art gallery, stop by the library, and of course meet in Westminster Hall for breads and spreads to continue the conversation. At this time, I would like to introduce our interim director of the Westminster Town Hall Forum, Erica Carter. Erica holds a Master's of Public Policy from the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, and prior to joining us, led global inclusion and social impact messaging at Ecolab. I would also like to take a moment to thank our media sponsors for today's program. MinnPost is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, reader-supported source of Minnesota news. We hope that you'll visit them at minnpost.com. And thank you as well to Sahan Journal, celebrating more than 5 years of nonprofit journalism for and about Minnesota's immigrants and communities of color. We can visit them at sahanjournal.com. And as always, the Town Hall Forum is pleased to partner with Minnesota Public Radio. Tonight is our last forum of the spring season, and I would like to say a special thank you to our incredible volunteers who are a joy to work with and who truly make these events happen. Yes. Volunteers, if you wouldn't mind standing so that we can thank you for your time and your commitment to the forum. As a reminder, we can silence our cell phones so as not to disrupt the evening. In the second half of this evening's program, our guests will be taking questions from the audience. Those of you who are with us in the sanctuary will find a blank card in your program. Please use that card to record a question for our speaker, and ushers will collect them at the beginning of the Q&A. If you're watching online, please submit your questions into the chat under the video at any point. We will also collect and present those as time allows. And now we'll move into our pre-broadcast introduction. For nearly 45 years, the Westminster Town Hall Forum has invited speakers of conscience to address issues of the day from an ethical perspective. We invite you to visit our website, westminsterforum.org, to see a full list of programs, past and present. And one note before we begin. This is a critically important fundraising period for the Forum. Today's program and everything the Town Hall Forum does is made possible by supporters like you. Individual donations are by far the largest source of funding for the Forum. Truly, the Forum does not happen without you. So if you can, please support the Westminster Town Hall Forum. For those of you who are here in person, there are donation envelopes in your program. If you're watching via the live stream, you can go to westminsterforum.org/donate. Thank you. And now it is my joy to introduce this evening's guest moderator, R.T. Ryback, President and CEO of the Minneapolis Foundation. R.T. has led the Minneapolis Foundation since July 2016, deepening its community impact, significantly growing its donor base and contributions, and launching a strategic framework that more directly focuses on using multiple impact levers to dismantle inequalities. A Minneapolis native, he spent nearly 30 years in journalism, publishing, marketing, and the internet before serving as the mayor of Minneapolis from 2002 to 2013. His most significant career focus has been developing equitable career paths for youth of color, including being a founding partner of Step Up, which has provided summer jobs to 20,000 high school students, and Generation Next, a coalition of civic, business, and school leaders focused on racial equity, where he served as executive director from 2014 to 2016. We are also incredibly grateful to the Minneapolis Foundation for being generous supporters of the Westminster Town Hall Forum and exclusive co-sponsors of this evening's forum. Please join me again in welcoming R.T. Ryback.
Thank you so much, Megan. A complete stranger to almost everyone in this community became nearly universally known, not only here but around the world, overnight. And yet we knew virtually nothing about him except how he died. George Floyd was both incredibly well known and a mystery until this remarkable book, His Name is George Floyd, was written. And we're very, very fortunate to have Robert Samuels here today. He, along with his co-writer, Tolu Olorunnipo, wrote this book in a way that I believe gave those of us in this community insight into not only what happened then, but much, much, much more important, what happened before, to George Floyd growing up, to George Floyd's ancestors, to the context around that in this America and in this Minneapolis. And I believe in that way, this stranger became far better known, but more important, we got such deep insight into really what happened then, but more important, what happens tomorrow. We are blessed to have Robert Samuels here because he's been such a wonderful, wonderful national writer. His title is a National Enterprise Reporter, which as a former reporter, I think means that unlike me, he gets to write about whatever the heck he wants to. And I asked him about how do you make these choices, and he really got into the questions people ask. His curiosity came out in a big, big way. So I'm really excited to hear from him. I also want to take a point of privilege to say that someone with the same last name, Don Samuels, I think it's your birthday. You there with Sandra Samuels. So let's bring your cousin from another whoever up here and listen to. So please welcome an incredible author with one of the better books you're ever going to read, Robert Samuels.
Well, thanks, everyone. I gotta say, this is really exciting. I've spent a good chunk of time of my life in Minneapolis, and I'm consistently asked if I'm related to Don Samuels. So I'm really thrilled. It's like I don't know the guy. Things get a little bit more complicated. Hi, everyone. My name's Robert. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you coming on such a lovely day. This is about choices, and it's not lost on me that you made the choice to be here when you could have been out on the lake enjoying a good day. I usually speak a little bit longer, but I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions, and I also don't want to talk to you too much about your own community. But what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about why my co-author, Tolu Olorunnipo, and I had gone on this journey, which led me to be in Minneapolis for a good portion of 2021, some of 2020, a little bit of 2022, and what I think we can learn in this moment. And when we start this conversation, I usually start to tell people about an incident that happened a couple blocks away from here. And that was when I was starting to learn about George Floyd. Now, I had this big curiosity about how he ended up at Cup Foods that day, because it wasn't in his neighborhood. People had said he had gone to pay a cell phone bill, but that didn't make much sense to me. And I had known that there were two people who were with him in the car. We didn't know much about those two people. One of them pleaded the fifth on the stand during the trial. The other one, a woman named Shawanda Hill, was called up by the defense and was essentially a hostile witness. I couldn't find Shawanda, but I had a friend from college who was working at a rival publication, and I begged her to tell me if she knew where Shawanda had lived, because I had seen on her Instagram that she had a photo of her. And my friend, in all her goodness, said, if anyone's going to do this story right, Robert, I think you're the one who's going to do it. I'm not in Minneapolis now, but how about I fly down And I don't precisely remember where she lives, but I can kind of remember the apartment. So we'll drive around together, we'll go to the apartment, and we'll see if we could find her. That was great. And so we drive around, we find the apartment building, and my friend says, I don't know the apartment number. And it's this big building with all these buttons out. And I did what reporters do. I say, well, there are two of us, so you can start on the top and I'll start on the bottom, and we'll knock on each door until we find her. But let's wait for someone to open the door. And then, by the grace of God, I pushed the door and it was open. And I heard a voice from the basement. I still haven't seen this person, just mysteriously go, who are you looking for? And I said to the person, I'm looking for Shawanda. And without knowing me, he goes, Shawanda, the woman who lives in, and then he gave the apartment number. And he didn't say woman, but we're in a church, so we'll say he said woman. And I said yes, and we got to the apartment, and I knocked on the door, and I said to Shawanda that I was here, my name was Robert, and I was trying to write a book about her ex-boyfriend. And she said to me, quizzically, you're really writing about Floyd? And I said, yeah, I am, and I want to make sure we're doing it the right way. And she said, well, if you're gonna do it, I have to do my part to make sure that it's right. It has to be right. And all around were people who talked about doing their part, who took really big chances to help add depth and nuance to a man who we had only known virtually through photos. My story, reporting this story, actually started the day before George Floyd died. And on that day, we thought we had already seen the defining racial incident of the year. I don't know if you guys remember this incident between a woman and her dog and a bird watcher at a dog park. And so you guys remember that? All right, their names were Amy and Christian Cooper. I'm a New Yorker, and so the day on the incident, I had actually got into a pretty big argument with an old friend from my high school. He was trying to explain to me that, legally speaking, Amy Cooper had a right to have called the cops on Christian. This idea infuriated me, and I tried to explain, rather poorly, that the law itself is not the arbiter of morality, especially when it comes to issues of race. I tried to explain how easy it can be to hide behind the veil of nuance and playing the devil's advocates while ignoring the lived real pain of people. And I said to him, if a cop killed me tomorrow, my biggest worry is that the first questions wouldn't be about my life or my dreams or the people I loved. The first question would be, what did I do to deserve it? And I stayed home that evening, but a man who lived in Minneapolis named George Floyd had picked up his friend, Maurice Hall, who wanted to buy a new laptop at a corner store called Cup Foods. And we know what happened next. The loose contours of it changed the world. And as I saw my feeds change, my social media feeds change into discussions about systemic racism, and I saw many of my colleagues at the Washington Post rushing toward the story, I actually tried to stay far away from it because I thought I knew where it was going. I thought there would be some protests, some bad information would come out about the victim, and there'd be confrontations with the police, which I did not want to be a part of because I had already had an experience of police putting their hands on me at a Donald Trump rally. And as a Black man, I knew that all of these things were uniquely dangerous and traumatizing. So when they asked me to write about the George Floyd moment, I actually thought about white people because they were acting strange. The people I knew, friends I knew, were sending me money to help me feel better, as if that could solve racism. They wanted to have me explain systemic things and how I grew up. And so I traveled to Oklahoma to spend time with a preschool teacher and her friends who are trying to be woke, who are trying to learn some hard truths about America, who did not want to be Karens. I did that story, and I was going back to covering the 2020 election when my editor, Steven Ginsberg, called a bunch of reporters into a room. And by a room, I mean Zoom meeting. It's the pandemic. And he had said that the Washington Post had decided to hold back its profile of George Floyd. And that's because he wanted to think about a bigger story that he thought could meet the moment that had been forced upon us. It was actually Tolu who suggested that it would be great if we could follow the life of one person as they navigated different American institutions that had been impacted by racism. Our editor, a man with a great heart and from Southern Virginia, said, "I've been thinking about that, and I keep on wondering if the person to do that with is George Floyd." When Stephen tells this story, he said he looked at my face because I apparently have one of those faces that always tell the truth. And he looked and said, "I'm afraid it will be too gimmicky." And I thought it wouldn't be gimmicky. It would be perfect. Because by then I knew a few things. I knew there had been breathless stories about George Floyd, but somehow, despite all of that, I did not feel that I knew him. I knew he played football, but I didn't know why. I knew he had moved here, but I didn't know why. These things are factoids. They're not revelations of the soul. And judging from the women I met in Oklahoma, I knew there were a lot more questions about what systemic racism actually is. People got it as a theory, but they did not understand how it actually plays out in real life. And that was the beginning of a Washington Post project that was accomplished by a dozen journalists. But as I learned about George Floyd, I just wanted to know more. And so between October 2020 and early 2022, we embarked on this journey to learn as much as we could about George Floyd. We met all 6 of his siblings. We ate dinner with them. We went to church with them. We talked to them almost daily while they watched the trial of the man who had murdered their brother. I got haircuts from George Floyd's barber. We walked the streets where he walked and sat in on rehab sessions in the places where he tried to get clean. We met a girlfriend who said she was the only woman George Floyd ever loved. We met another girlfriend who said she was the only woman George Floyd ever loved. We rummaged through friends' old storage closets and looked for mementos. And we read old poems he had written and raps he wrote to himself. And when we asked people to tell us stories about George Floyd, we did not just ask them to tell us. We asked them to act them out as if he was living in real time. And in doing so, they'd always kind of purse their face like this and stutter a lot. And that's how we truly got to get a sense of George Floyd's hopes and dreams, his life outlook, and his soul. But that's not all we did. We found eyewitnesses and talked to them about the day they saw him die. We went back 7 generations and looked up his ancestry records. We went through clippings. You guys know what microfiche is? A mature audience. And to learn about his past. And we met with Mayor Jacob Fry and Governor Tim Walz to try to get a sense of the present. We spoke with police chiefs and professors about how to interpret things, and Reverend Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson told us about the future. Our last interview came about a half hour before our deadline, and that was with President Joe Biden. So, who was George Floyd? Well, I like to say he was a gregarious man. He had lots of friends, a big community that beloved him. He was godly. The first time I saw a Bible he had, it was open to the book of Proverbs. He was comical. He was a big guy, a football player. And he didn't like getting hit because although he was big, his friends always thought he was kind of sensitive. And so if people were rushing him, instead of running away from them, he just tossed the ball to them and say, "I'm done." And he was complicated. And by complicated, I mean he had tried all his life. He had this life goal from second grade about becoming a lawyer and then a Supreme Court justice because he had learned about Thurgood Marshall. And even though he was reading and writing at grade level as a boy, growing up in deep poverty, which is an accomplishment, people saw his size and speed and said, "You should play football." And when they did that, academics fell by the wayside, couldn't go to college, and gave in to the economics of his neighborhood. That is, he started dealing drugs, and then he started using. And he found himself trapped in a cycle, in a state that did not offer him health insurance, in a penal system that did not listen to him when he said he felt depressed, that he needed help. And one day he's out in Texas and he sees a friend, an old friend from around the corner, and the friend looks good. He is bigger than he used to be. His eyes are less jaundiced. And he starts telling him about a place called Minneapolis. And he believes that if you can get to Minneapolis, you can get clean and your life will change. Now, a lot more happens in the book, and I really want the chance to talk with you about it and to answer questions. But a lot of times people ask me what I've learned. And the thing that I learned sort of is crystallized in a moment that I had during the trial of Derek Chauvin. I had gone to church with one of George Floyd's brothers, Philonis, and he had broken down at the church. And then I had gone to a rally in St. Paul that was being hosted by a woman named Tashira Garraway. The rally was to memorialize her fiance, Justin Tigan, who had died under dubious police circumstances. Before I went there, I was supposed to meet Courtney Ross, one of George Floyd's ex-girlfriends. And before we got there, she called and she told me she was having a nervous breakdown. And at that point, I had listened and heard so much that I had looked to the photographer who was with me, and I said, after we go to this rally, I'm calling it a day. I just need to go home and get my mind off everything. So we're at the rally, and Tashira Garraway calls all of these people who've had a loved one die at the hands of the police to come speak. And she tells them to keep it brief. And I figured this must be because they're talkative people. But it soon became clear that the people needed to keep it brief because there were so many of them. And as I heard story after story after story, including one by a woman who looked just like my mother, I found myself completely moved and completely overwhelmed. And then, as I was heading to my car to take that break, someone looked at their phone and said, "They've killed another one." And that person was Dante Wright, who had died because a police officer had mistaken her taser for a gun. And here I was, and here were these mothers who had already lost so much. And at that moment, none of them decided to go home. They decided what they needed to do was to go to where the scene of the incident happened so they could give comfort to another mother. And at that moment, I began to realize that racism in this country is not just a dark stain, the original sin, the dark cloud, but it moves as a force. It lives and breathes. And if we don't acknowledge or confront that force, it can never go away. Now, when you begin to understand that fact, incidents like what happened to George Floyd cannot seem isolated as much as they feel inevitable. At our worst, we can leave feeling helpless, like we're sitting ducks just waiting for the next thing to happen. But I often tell people that my time as a reporter reifies my faith in humanity far more than it repletes it, even when we've been with people who are at the underbelly of the American promise, even when we understand the corruption that happens when we don't acknowledge history, and not just for Black people, right? Our white brothers and sisters are also corrupted when we ignore history and when they learn how easy it can be to take advantage of privileges that are afforded to them. Now, why does my work reify humanity? Well, remember that I started this discussion saying that I did not want to talk about George Floyd at all. And now look where we are. And look why that happened. It happened because people had the capacity to share, to care about others. And in the pages that we wrote, one thing I hope people take away is the beauty and the remarkable persistence of people, largely Black people, who filled its pages. And while we try not to get into the head of George Floyd, I don't really have reason to believe that he would have considered his life tragic. And we know that because of the things he wrote. One of the things that he wrote on a day that was probably one of his last days on earth was filled with a desire for people to see him with all the fullness and nuance that comes with being a human being. He'd say in the poem, "Things are really hard for me. I'm stuck here with no money and with COVID. I'm dealing with my addiction. Man, life really sucks. But life never sucks. Life really sucks, but life never sucks." And I think about people like Nikema Levy Armstrong and Tashira Garraway, who continue to push for equity. And when I ask them why, they would tell me, if we don't continue fighting, we don't have a chance. And Nikema taught me a phrase that I think about often, and I know the governor does too, which is, when you see something that's wrong, you have to work to do something to address the wrong. You can't simply admire the problem. And I think about what Tolu told me the day when I said to him, you know, this stuff is really hard. I don't think we should keep going. Robert, Tolu said, we just have to do our part. We felt really great when our book, His Name is George Floyd, finally landed on bookshelves. I thought about my friends' children reading it in a couple years, and I eventually thought about how children I would later have would use it to understand this moment. But really, I thought of myself, and when I was a lanky 16-year-old boy who wanted to understand why it was so hard to be Black in America. I imagined a boy like that reading the pages and finding a sense of worth and understanding. And I hoped that our work would help all people recognize one another's humanity and inspire them to rethink the American context about race and racism. Fortunately, the book was well received. We got some fancy stickers on it. Here's a National Book Award finalist, a Dayton Literary Peace Prize, and one of my big life dreams, the Pulitzer Prize. Thank you. The day Tolu and I were set to receive the Pulitzer Prize, we learned about our first book ban. It happened at a school we were scheduled to speak at in Memphis, Tennessee, an all-Black high school filled with kids who looked like us and live in a world even more fractured than the one I grew up in, more divisive than the one I had written about. And what the entire affair says about the access to education and what it meant to me was heartbreaking. It was frustrating, and it felt deeply personal. Now, I take it this is a fairly liberal crowd, and I think it's easy for us to consider a book ban as a badge of honor and find it even easier to mock schools or school boards in states that are doing it. And at the core, I think it's really important to remember how frequently opportunities are being foreclosed on children looking to see themselves and hoping to learn about people who are not like themselves. Tolu and I had to make a decision about what to do, whether or not we would even go to that school. And when we were making the decision, I was reminded of a poem that I loved in high school by a poet named County Collin called Yet Do I Marvel. In the poem, Collin talks about how he has no doubt that God is good, well-meaning, and kind. And he ends the poem by saying this: "Yet do I marvel at this curious thing, to make a person back and to bid him sing." And I think about how empowering it is to use the power of sing, to tell meaningful stories that can exclaim faith and optimism and the hope that I continually see in people every day. So what is doing your part? Doing your part is to avoid feeling deterred or defeated. Doing your part is to disperse the obligations that come with knowing about history, about life, about truth, no matter how gruesome, no matter how uncomfortable. George Floyd used the power of sing. Now, if you did not know George Floyd, the 3 words that you most associated with him were, "I can't breathe." But there were another 3 words that people who knew George Floyd associated with him. They were the words he had always said to people that he thought were too aggrieved and disenfranchised, people who he did not think that heard it enough. Those 3 words were, "I love you." In the final minutes of his life, he hoped someone would hear his cry, would tell his story, that they'd keep going. He wanted to use that power to dispel that message, which is why people believe those were the words that he said. "Mom, I love you. Reese, my friend, I love you. Tell my kids I love them." They weren't incidental. It was the power of sing. And when he did it, the protests came, and we were inspired to keep going by people who kept going. They understood that pessimism is the ultimate American privilege, and optimism is the only American hope, which is different than a Pollyanna-ish naivety. It can sometimes feel like a defense mechanism, and it is the hope that's so often carried by people who should have little hope, who've yet to receive the fullness of the American promise. It is the hope that's embedded in so many of the books that they're telling us not to read, and it is the reason that we continue to write. It's the reason why we still can get up to say life sucks, but life never sucks. And it is the reason to continue doing your part. Those are what I wanted to share with. That's what I wanted to share with you today. And I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Wonderful. That was just absolutely wonderful. What we want to do, we have a very, very smart audience here. Erica, somebody refresh me on how they answer questions again. Do they? Got it. You hear that? Okay, so people will be coming by. So please feel very comfortable giving us your questions. And I wanted to start off with just a couple. I want to ask a little bit about why you wrote this book and many others, but I read it twice, once with our whole team at the Minneapolis Foundation, and then I went back over it. And the second time, I was constantly thinking of what ifs. What if George Floyd had lived and survived that hideous incident and moved forward? What would you be asking him right now?
Right. Well, I think a part of it, right, is what we learned is that the racism that revealed itself the day he died was only a part of it, right? So much of it, so much more had to do with how he lived. And I would want to know about his understanding of what it meant to have grown up in a red line community, what it had meant to grow up with a family that once was one of the wealthiest families in North Carolina and lost it all in a single swoop. And the other thing that I want to know is why he bothered to keep going. I think that's something that people take for granted, that there's a truly remarkable persistence that happens when people are down and out and they make the choice. They make the choice to say, all right, I'm going to move 1,000 miles away, apart from my family, to see if I can make it better. And when I discover that things aren't going well, I'm still going to keep going. And so that's the conversation that I'd want to have with him.
Yeah, you touched very quickly on that idea of being one of the wealthiest families.
Yeah.
And that, I think, was one of the beautiful parts of this book where you put this up against the context of American history. So pre-Civil War, enslaved family with a plantation owner who was trading in slaves. The two families after the Civil War had a very different trajectory. For the first few years, his family, a large family, worked really hard, became a large property owner. The other family, the slave owners, were floundering a bit. Can you refresh people on how that pivoted and how Reconstruction moved into Jim Crow and what that really meant with the barn burning and that?
Yeah, sure. So we went back to look through 7 generations of George Floyd's family history. And what we learned was his great-great-grandfather, Hillary Thomas Stewart, who was the first known person in the line that was emancipated. He was a genius of a farmer. He had amassed 500 acres of land that was worked on by his 22 children. And that would have put him in the top 2% of landowners in North Carolina at the time. Not black landowners, period. But before Hillary Thomas Stewart could make a single intergenerational transfer, which is how people pass along wealth in this country, he was duped out of all the land. And how'd they do it? They did it through false taxes, through having him sign documents that he did not understand. How do we know he did not understand them? Well, he was not allowed to learn how to read, so he was forced to sign documents he could not read. And at the end of his life, he ends up with nothing, 0. And so his family is forced to till the land under sharecropping for a person who once promises to make them whole and never fully makes them whole. So I think there's a sort of false narrative that comes out when you see people who are poor, particularly black people who are poor, that they're not working. George Floyd came from a family going back generations of people who worked incredibly, incredibly hard. What wasn't there was equal treatment and an acknowledgement of the work they did.
The history you take from there is really excruciating, and just an understanding of what happened, multi-generational poverty. I think one thing that stood out was his grandmother, who worked herself to the bone and died with nothing.
Yeah.
And the lessons she and her daughter, George Floyd's mother, told him were quite interesting. They weren't ones of, they were ones about how to show up, how to always say, sir and madam, how to not come in the front door.
Yeah.
Those words were really fascinating to read. They were sad, but also thinking about him walking up to the counter at Cup Foods with those lessons about how to show up. Really, I unpacked that and tried to think about what was that encounter like as he came up to the cash register. Did he follow those lessons? How did he bring that message forward?
Yeah. Well, there's some we know, and there's some we'll never know, because George Floyd isn't here to tell his side of the story. But what we do know is that when he met Shawanda Hill, who I had mentioned earlier, when he met her at Cup Foods that day, the first thing that I asked Shawanda, well, when you saw him, what do you think? What went through your head? And her first thing she said was, why are you dressed like that? Because George Floyd was known for being very particular about not going out of the house looking like he was dressed as he would be inside the house. And so there's this indelible image of him that we see that's not truly the one that people knew. But when he was growing up, he was told the things that many black youth are told. Be courteous to one another. Respect the police. Don't do anything. Given their family history, he was told, don't try to be too wealthy, because if you get wealth, they'll just take it from you, right? Think about the psychological impact that has, knowing that that was your family history. George Floyd wasn't like that. He had dreams from early on. He would tell his siblings that he wanted to change the world. The other thing about George Floyd was he was a big guy. And because I was lifting weights at the time, I wanted to ask his family about his size, what his relationship with his size was. And they said he kind of hated being big because everyone saw him as a threat. And so he would shrink himself. If he walked into a room, if he walked into this room, he'd feel it incumbent to meet people and shake their hands so people wouldn't feel intimidated by him. And that was sort of the cruel irony of this. He was naturally lanky, and he had built up his body because he had great ambitions to play football. And when that didn't work out, he was left with this frame that seemed massive, but kind of left him as a shell of a person.
Let's talk a little bit about him physically, too, because this, I think, was an important part of the book. This big man who shrunk himself, this person perceived as being aggressive, was really not a whole lot of things that we know about what happens with black men in the country. You also got into a lot about both poverty and education.
Yeah.
And you got some remarkable things. You found a teacher who knew what his reading scores were in second grade.
Yeah. Are there any teachers in the house? God bless you all. All right. So one of the people who he spoke to over the course of the reporting was his second grade teacher, Waynell Sexton. And she kept every single file. And so she had George Floyd's academic records from second grade, which showed that he was reading and writing at grade level, actually doing math at a little bit beyond grade level. And he had this essay that he had written. Now, in second grade, so it's more like a paragraph, but in the essay, he talks about how he had wanted to become a Supreme Court justice because he had learned about Thurgood Marshall, and he thought it was going to be the coolest thing to be able to adjudicate the law. And it wasn't just the dream itself, right? It was the way that it was written. All the words were spelled right. The grammar was right. It was, for those who knew him at that age, people would think he was quite brilliant, that he was quite smart, that he was performing beyond his expectations. Unfortunately, his community did not fully know what to do with a person who was performing beyond their education and beyond their expectations. And it was reinforced that people in his community don't succeed by becoming lawyers. They succeed by playing football. And this wasn't theoretical. They had many people in the neighborhood who had joined the Chicago Bears. And so they say, invest in this. And because of the educational structure at the time, Houston was the last major city to integrate. And how they integrated was the best black teachers left the black schools, were sent to the white schools, and the worst white teachers were sent to the black schools, people who did not have that cultural competence. And so he was not given a structure, an education structure, in which was designed to propel him to succeed.
So this second grader who is doing so well then can't pass the competency test and can't go to college.
Right.
Welcome to play on the playing field of the school that he can't get into. As we get the audience questions, the first couple here really follow a line that you wrote, which is when he came to Minneapolis. You wrote, "The promise of progress in Minneapolis can be a cruel mirage." Someone else quoted a poet, which was, "Minneapolis is the only place to burn and get whiter." A couple other ones in here. Talk to us a little bit about our city.
Yeah, well, I don't want to overstep. But this is, so a part of the reason I came is because I needed to learn about the context in which he was living here. And when George Floyd moves to Minneapolis, he's told that it's this great place where you can get a job, where you can get health insurance, where you can get healing, where you can go away from all of the problems that were in his neighborhood and the drug trade that was in his neighborhood. And he gets here and he enrolls in a rehab center that's catered specifically toward black men. And for a while, he's pretty successful. He finds a job, he finds a second job, he gets a girlfriend, he finds a nice house in a nice section of St. Louis Park. And he's living there with a friend that he met at rehab. And he walks in one day and the friend's dead. He dies of a drug overdose. And when that happens, that begins to send George Floyd on a spiral in which, he tries to re-enroll in treatment, but it gets really hard to do so. And he's living in a state, when we talk about the mirage of Minneapolis, I think Sam Myers calls it the Minnesota paradox. It's this idea of this liberal place that has very progressive policy and yet still has some of the widest disparities between blacks and whites that you'd see anywhere in the country. So when you look at math and reading scores, Minnesota and Wisconsin are kind of in a race for the widest disparity, greatest disparities in incomes, greatest disparities in health. And you begin to start to question why that is. You'd probably know better than I would. But one of the things that people talked about was sort of the utilitarian aspect of the state, greatest good for the greatest number, the fact that the black community was not small enough to have an outsized impact in places, in the halls of government. But what that means on the ground, right, is that some of the disparities that existed in Texas still happen in Minnesota, much to George Floyd's surprise. And one of the cruelest ones, I think, has to do with the treatment of opioid use and opioid abuse. So what we know on the federal level is that when opioid addiction started happening in white middle-class suburbs, all this money was poured into treatment and rehab. There were all these efforts that were placed into it. And when the federal government said in the 1990s that they're putting millions into similar programs, when we looked at the actual coffers, when we went through the expenditures, those programs were zero funded. They didn't get a cent. And the cruelness is that about a week after George Floyd is murdered, a report comes out from the state of Minneapolis saying, we've been treating this in the wrong place. We've been looking in the suburbs, but actually when we're looking at opioid addiction, we need to put more intense work into minority neighborhoods. And that those dollars began to flow through, but for George Floyd, they flowed through way too late. He was too late. It was too late for him.
Along with George Floyd's history, you got in a bit to the history of the Chauvin family, slaveholding family.
Yeah. No, not slaveholding.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
As I went through that, I kept looking for cues about what created the murder that we saw.
Yeah.
What did you take out of that?
So Derek Chauvin did not respond to my emails asking for me to chat with him. But we did reach out to more than 120 people who had known him or worked with him or went to school with him. And we were able to kind of amass a few things. The first thing is that he had a early love for Starsky and Hutch and sort of daring policing. But any of you are governed by the 3rd Precinct in Minneapolis. So the 3rd Precinct itself had a reputation for producing what is known as thumpers, people who'd go out, carry out the law, beat people up. And Derek Chauvin was no different. What we found were at least 28 complaints about Derek Chauvin before the murder of George Floyd, and at least 8 uses of neck restraints, choking, before he had met George Floyd. And as we went through the research, what we had found was over time, his use of those restraints, which was legal and supposed to prevent death, were used more cavalierly for longer periods of time. And when people complained about Derek Chauvin, he was only disciplined once at the beginning of the career. And so what many people who worked with him believe is that he was essentially policing with little consequence. And that allowed him to continue to push things in the ways that he did in May 5 years ago. And so it's hard to come up, in the way that we try very hard not to get into George Floyd's head. I don't believe, we can get into Derek Chauvin's head either. But at the basics, what we know is that he was a person who found himself being a police officer. His family came to the United States by boat, like George Floyd's family, but freely. They had originally settled in Michigan, and they were allowed to live a pretty working and middle-class life for all of Derek Chauvin's life. Derek Chauvin wasn't particularly good at anything, as there were fewer accommodations than there were complaints, a fairly mediocre student. And he was given a lot of opportunities despite some of his shortcomings that George Floyd was not.
Yeah. You talked about not being able to get inside their heads. Could I get inside yours for just a second as a journalist? Because you mentioned how difficult this was at a certain point to do. Your job was to be objective in this. You're not you're a human being, and you're going through this. You went to the Chauvin trial, right? What was this like for you as an experience as a journalist whose role was to bring this forward, but who clearly has lived a life in the United States and seen all of this coming down and seen protesters? How did that feel for you as a human being who needed to be a journalist?
Yeah. Well, thank you
Do you
for
mind
that.
getting into that?
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Okay.
It's fine. I'll try to do it without tearing up, which sometimes I'm able to do. I think
Plenty of that has happened here, so don't worry about that.
I grew up with a fairly conservative journalistic ethic, and I believe in the power of storytelling. I believe that when truth is revealed to people who want to hear it, things happen. And the majority of my career, that's been true. You see that with local reporting. You say this bridge is broken or something's happened, they fix the bridge. And so I truly mean it when I say that I felt no greater obligation and no greater honor, no greater obligation to tell this story, because I couldn't think of anything more worthwhile than to help people understand the true nature of systemic racism. It afflicts me, it afflicts you. It changes the ways that we talk about America to our children. And I was really propelled by, if people can understand him, if people can understand some of the things in his life that led to him being him, if we can get people more interested in the details and nuances of his life more than his death, then that would be good work. That would be really, really good work. And that propelled me to keep going. And that, I can speak for Tolu in that too, that, we knew the stakes were high. If we messed up, that would be really bad. It would besmirch the name of a person who didn't ask for it. It would be a waste of the time of a family who had really opened their arms to us when they had said no to practically everybody else. Why they said yes to us is a question for them. And so when you're doing the work, you carry that. You sort of carry that. And at the same time, there was a period where 7 people had breakdowns right in front of me. People started punching themselves. People felt a lot of guilt and a lot of trauma reliving or rethinking about the things that happened in your city. And every time you had to make choices, when to tell a person to stop, even though it's not in maybe your best journalistic interest to tell them to stop, but you want them to preserve themselves. When to allow a person to keep going, when to take a phone call when you don't want to take the phone call because you're out doing something or trying to enjoy your life, but someone who had known George Floyd had a memory and they just really wanted to say it to you. And to really understand the privilege that you are allowed to be with someone at the most tender moments of their lives. Like when we had this story, when we were working on this book, we had no idea if Derek Chauvin was gonna be acquitted or if he was gonna go to jail. We had no idea if a police bill would pass. We had no idea if any of these things would happen. We were living life and wondering these questions as they were wondering it. I did in the aftermath, I think I started noticing some things. Like I noticed myself getting more angry when I saw injustice. And I think that was because I had a better understanding of where it came from because of the reporting we had done. And it was hard for me to think about reporting on other things, which is what I get paid to do. Right. And I would say it probably took like a year and a half for me to start feeling more like myself again.
Yeah.
But, right, like we didn't choose this because we didn't choose to do this because we were weak. We chose this because we thought it would help make society strong. And I don't want to ennoble that, because that, I feel, is the obligation of a reporter. But I think the true honor of it really goes to the hundreds of people who decided they were going to take a chance on us, and joined with us in Michigan, and joined with us in Mission. I think that really illustrated just the wonderfulness of the American spirit. And I feel like a lot of people who talk to us because they are poor and they're, I said, at the underbelly, often don't get to be seen as the portrait of the indomitable American spirit. But that's truly what they were.
You don't want to ennoble the work, but could I? Because I just want to just thank you, because you could have written a book about George Floyd's history, which would be really good. You could have written a book about American history. You wrote both, and in that way helped us really navigate both of those things. So I want to thank you for it. I want to follow that with a really tough question that somebody asked us to ask, which is
Let's go.
about the book being banned.
Yeah.
Why was the book banned? And what do you know about that, I guess? And where?
Well, the first ban that we heard about was in Memphis, Tennessee, and it happened when the school district learned we were coming. And at that point, we were told that the book was too adult for its high school students. Because why was it considered too adult? None of them had read the book, but they Googled it, and when you Google it on some library site, it comes up as adult literature, which means it's not, the little engine that could, Nonetheless, that's what they had decided to do. When we spoke to them, this, I did not take this well. And when, I spoke to them, they said it was sort of standard protocol and this is what they had to do. But the truth of the matter is that when we think about book bans, I think we think of kind of like just very staid conservative people who don't want people reading anything about Black people or queer people or people of color. And it's also true that people in state houses that are like that often have very rich, strong urban areas that have to follow the ban. So what happens functionally is that you have minority teachers and minority leaders having to make decisions on whether or not they can get away with giving their students literature with people who look like them or people who have stories like the ones that they live. Bear in mind that these kids who were too young to read our book would have been around the same age as Darnella Frazier, who boldly recorded that video of George Floyd's murder. And they didn't live too far away from where Tyrone Nichols had been beaten to death. So why was it banned? State interest. They had to make a choice about whether they would fight to teach a book like that or lose state funding. Fear, and I think a misunderstanding of the project. I'm not an activist by nature. I'm a journalist. My job is to tell truth. And I think if they were afraid or deemed it inappropriate or woke, I think that would be a misread of the work. I'll also say that in conversations that we've had with people, even at the college level, these sorts of things don't come out in the way that you saw it happen at the Naval Library, where they're like, okay, we're going to look at a library and start pulling books out. They come in choices about what to put books in, and a lot of opportunities for young people in many places around the country were foreclosed upon because librarians had decided, the risk wasn't worth it.
Because people tried to ban this book, I would like everybody in this audience to do the very best job they could of buying a copy, spreading the word, making sure that everyone, this is a book that we need. The book is, his name is George Floyd, the author is Robert Samuels. Thank you for the incredible contribution that you've made to us.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Can I just ask one point of privilege here? My book editor always complains that I don't take a picture of the audience. So,
I'll take it. You stand there.
No, I don't want to.
Yes, you have to be in the picture. Okay. Everybody wave. Keep waving, we'll do a little video.
Thanks.